Welcome to chapter number 2. I just couldn't move on before having this conversation with you about what is fighting, what fundamental problem there is in fighting, what underlying problems we have in fighting, what fighting styles are trying to solve the underlying problems, and also look at how well boxing does compared to the other martial arts, what problems, underlying problems it tries to solve, and of course, trying to give the answer to what is the best martial art combat sport out there for you, for me, for anyone to practice if there is such a combat sport that covers the entire or the full spectrum of the fighting problem. Let's start with, first of all, a very important question. What do you think is the problem of fighting? The fundamental problem of fighting? Actually, let's think outside the box. What do you think is the fundamental problem of life in general when it comes to physical activity? What actually you think that a runner, a swimmer, a gymnast will have in common with a fighter? What do they try to solve? Motion. Not emotions, motion. Even though emotions will be very present in the fight for sure, but motion is the underlying problem of life in general, if you think, right? Everything what we do is, as humans, we try to optimize emotion. What do I mean with that? Breathing, nervous system, cardiovascular system, all motion processes inside our bodies that even if I stay still without moving, there is life happening. And that life, I can't give it a better name than motion. And this is actually what is the underlying problem of life in general, and this is what we will try to solve in fighting. We will have to battle beyond technique with breathing, with muscles, with movement, with aggression, with emotions. There's so much more happening. But if we are to zoom and narrow it, at the core of our problem, in our case it's fighting, it's motion. A motion that will give birth to a couple of underlying problems that will close the circle of fighting, right? Good. Now we know that motion will give birth to our underlying problems in fighting, which actually is what we need to talk about. Motion is a more philosophical side of fighting, which is very present in fight. But now let's go to the more practical aspect of fighting, which is the underlying problems. And the fighting styles that try to solve the underlying problems that will close the circle of fighting. Very good. Let's start thinking of fighting as a very logical process, right? It's a process, like any other process you can think of. So let's look from it from an objective point of view. Two fighters, fighter A and fighter B, they engage in a physical activity that we can classify as fighting. Some would say it's physical aggression, whatever label you want to give to it, and for whatever reason they decided to engage in this physical activity, which is fighting. Basically what they will try to do is to cancel each other's movement and motion through all the activity they can generate, right? Being punches and all the other stuff, right? We'll talk in a moment, you'll see what I'm trying to say. Very good. Let's start with fighter A, fighter B, here, standing. And they engage in this dance, putting pressure on one another, right? What does it look like they are doing here? right? You see that they don't want to engage yet. It's too dangerous. They don't want to stay too close neither because it's too dangerous. What they are trying to do actually, they are distance managing and controlling at the moment, right? Before they do anything else, what they do is they try to judge the distance. So the very first thing you do when you get into a fighting altercation, unless you're very crazy or very drunk, or these two fighters are too fearless, which is crazy. You should always have some type of fear because any physical activity that with the intention to inflict damage on each other can be dangerous and is dangerous, okay? So it doesn't matter how trained you are, there is always a certain level of danger because it's chaotic. The only thing you try to do is to organize the chaos as such as that you can capitalize on the weaknesses of or openings of your opponent. But realistically, is there a danger? Yes, at any point in time, there is a danger that you can get hurt as well while trying to inflict damage on the other person. So the best fight, undeniably, is the one that never happened. But let's say that you couldn't avoid or you just engaged because you're a sportsman and you want to engage in a fight with another human being. What you first do when you stand in front of another and you start this dance of pressure, invisible pressure, is actually you are judging each other's distance, is distance management and control. That's the very first underlying problem in fighting. And this is what actually boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and any striking form of art tries to solve. But what happens if for whatever reason one of these fighters failed to keep the distance, or with the intention decrease the distance, and they got into a clinch situation? What will they do here? They have a completely new problem. It's not striking anymore, right? And that problem we can classify as clinch management and control, okay? And any fighting style you can think of that fights from this position or tries to take down the other person or manages this clinching situation, clinching underlying problem of fighting: freestyle wrestling, judo, combat sambo claimed does it, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and any other fighting style that, or combat sport, martial art you can think of that tries to solve the underlying problem of clinching, underlying problem of clinch management and control. Very good. But what happens if these two fighters didn't manage to keep the distance, the clinching, didn't manage to disengage, and they ended up on the ground, intentionally or accidentally? They will encounter a completely new problem. And that problem is ground management and control. There are many fighting styles trying to solve that problem. Some do better, some do less good. But undeniably here, there is no real competition. It's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the best at trying at solving the underlying problem number 3, which is ground management and control. Let's recap quick. What are the problems and what are the fighting styles? Distance management and control, first underlying problem: boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, Taekwondo, Karate, Capoeira, any fighting style, striking fighting style you can think of, it's classified here: striking, distance management and control. That is the first underlying problem of fighting. Underlying problem number 2 is if these two fighters, fighter A, fighter B, they don't manage to keep the distance and they end up in a clinch situation, then that's the problem number 2, underlying problem number 2, clinch management and control. Freestyle wrestling, Greco-Roman, judo, combat sambo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and any other form of wrestling, grappling, martial art, combat sport you can think of will attempt to solve this problem. And when they end up on the ground, they have a completely new underlying problem of fighting, and that is ground management and control. And if they end up standing, disengaging, you can see that we close completely the circle of fighting. Actually, fighting is composed of three underlying problems. And any fighting style you can think of, it's just a label. Basically, what that fighting style attempts to do as best as it can is to present you with tools and solutions in how to solve one of the underlying problems. At best, many claim to be able to solve all the fighting spectrum. They are liars. That's the truth. However, when it comes to understand how well boxing does within its fighting category and how actually what is the place of boxing in all this pool of fights and all this chaos of fighting, boxing is very narrowed indeed. It only focuses on the upper body of the upper body of the human being, and in fact, it is even there is not fully exploiting its full possibilities, which would be in this case the forearms, exploiting the elbows. We only connect with the fist. That is true. We don't take that from the table. However, if we are to look objectively at what happens in an MMA fight, because that is the closest contest we can look and analyze footage and real action, right? What happens is that about 80% of what is happening within an MMA fight while the fighters are standing, it's actually fist fighting. It's not elbows, it's not even kicks, low kicks, knees, are fist fighting. So from this point of view, if your intention is to become the best fighter you can be, we can argue, looking at the availability of real proof, real footage out there, that boxing is the art to start with, because it's what MMA fighters exchange and do the most are boxing techniques. They connect mainly when it comes to the striking department with the fists. And here we come to what is the best fighting style, martial art for you to practice to be the best fighter you can, or what is the best out there for you to practice. Look, if we are to look separately to the fighting styles, it all depends on the level of knowledge. It would be very, very difficult nowadays to assess which one would be best. Back in the days when we didn't have the internet, when we didn't have so much schooling available throughout the world, where the sport of fighting, martial art, MMA was not so polarized, it was a bit easier to put two fighters that were completely purist in a cage or in a ring and let them to perform and discover which one is best. Our days would be very, very difficult because of the polarization. Honestly, I think of it like this. Start with boxing, add striking, later on add grappling, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you'll be good. You will be as complete as possible as a fighter, in my humble opinion. A problem of fighting is motion. This is what we try. We try to cancel each other's motion. Of course, we're not trying to kill each other. I don't want to kill another human being. But while that other human being can create through its motion some kind of a movement, being that kinetic energy, through kinetic energy movement, which is the most dangerous one that can knock you out, right, punches, or being that some kind of a static movement, more slow, more like anaconda, right, and it can slide in some submissions, some chokeholds. That is dangerous, and that is something that I am trying to avoid in a fight in a human being when dealing with another human being's physical and emotional aggressiveness, right? So basically what we are trying to do when it comes to fighting is to cancel each other's motion, not completely. Again, I don't want to kill anyone because that would have Psychological implications, I believe so, and of course social ones. You cannot end up in the jail, even though you can justify it, it's still. I believe that 99% of the fights are avoidable if we talk about street fights, and the best fight is the one that never happened. But if you decide for some reason, then this is actually what happens. You try to understand that you are trying to cancel the other human, or you have to cancel the other human motion, not fully. Of course, we look at underlying problems. What are the underlying problems? Because that's the full spectrum of the fighting, and the full spectrum of the fighting is actually three distinctive moments that happen in fight. Those are the underlying problems, and the first one we have is the problem of distance management and control, clinch management and control, and ground management and control. And even though there are countless amounts of fighting styles throughout the world claiming that they best solve those problems, so far evidence of the most effective fighting styles that we have out there, in my humble opinion, with no disrespect to other fighting styles, combat sports and martial arts, is, I think the boxing is among the best, if not the best, to start with when it comes to striking, because of the foot movement, because of the customizability of the stance itself, and because by solving the problem of the fist fighting, you actually solve at least two-thirds of the problem of fighting. And because of the footwork you have in boxing, you have a great deal of understanding the distance of fighting. Of course, with that, not underestimating the other striking elements, such as knees, such as kicks, such as elbows. So it's very important to be aware of that as well as a striker, as a boxer. We looked into the clinch management and control department, the two combat sports, martial arts, call it whatever you feel comfortable, that best solve that underlying problem of the clinch management and control, in my humble opinion, and through what I've been observing in straight fights, and also, and more importantly, MMA, mixed martial arts, is freestyle wrestling and judo. Not the American movie type of wrestling, right? The one with jumps and a lot of fancy movement. No, I'm talking about the Olympic type of wrestling and judo, the Olympic judo. When it comes to ground management and control, there are no equals to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, at least up to this date. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the best at solving the problem of ground management and control. So those are the fighting styles, and which one is the best? My friend, in my humble opinion, if you want to be the best fighter you can, to close the spectrum of the fighting problem, the underlying problems of fighting, you have to be humble to realize that every and each one of these underlying problems is a separate problem, and you have to study it individually. You cannot study one style and think that you will be able to deal with all of them. Yes, there are styles that are a little bit better, or there are fundamental problem styles that will cancel other styles a bit more or less, but that also is very subjective, depends very much on the level we're talking about here. But generally speaking, if you're a humble human being and fighter, you cannot deny that distance management, clinch management, and ground management and control are separated problems, and you have to dedicate time to study individually every and each one of these problems, and only then look into something like an MMA class or a combat sambo class. But MMA class would generally does a better job in actually blending all the styles, or blending these three underlying problems together with the key tools, with the techniques you're being taught in the classes, specifically already boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So basically mixing the styles together. That would be an MMA class. But an MMA class cannot teach you separately the styles. An MMA class is specifically and merely designed to, it's actually a tactical class. It's not a technical class. You cannot learn MMA in a class of MMA. What you in MMA do is you blend the styles together. It's a tactical approach to the problem. It's not a technical. Very little technical. It has some technical implications, of course. When you blend, you'll end up with something a bit different, a bit new. But you cannot pop into MMA class and say, Igor, can you teach me Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Say, come on, to go to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. Or you pop into an MMA class, can you teach me striking? Say, you have to go and study striking first, right? It's logical. When you pop into an MMA class, you're already a seasoned striker, wrestler, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter, and then in MMA class, we blend it all together. So actually, we are more strategical oriented, tactical oriented in an MMA class, not technical. Technical, you have to specifically practice the sports that are inherently designed to solve one of the underlying problems. If you go and practice sports that attempt to solve all the other underlying problems, actually end up a little bit more with this same issue that I have with the MMA classes. You do everything, a little bit of everything, and nothing really of anything, right? So this is my personal opinion. If you go into, if Krav Maga or MMA or any combat sambo or any other combat sport label there, that it solves basically your problem, hands down. But my experience says that the most optimal way is how I above explained it to you. And so we finally wrap this chapter, and see you in the next chapter, is where we will be talking from now on mainly about boxing.